A defeated empire does not always stay defeated. Sometimes it broods, rebuilds, finds silver, raises a child to hate its enemy, and then sends that child across the Alps with elephants and an army, just to make Rome realize the last war was not really over. This video was made possible by NordVPN. Click the link below to get an exclusive deal with 4 extra months. Also, check out the merch store for new character pins, the last remaining bucket plushies, and a calendar. And we have partnered with U2s to bring you an exclusive oversimplified Roman consul figure. It is limited edition, so once it is gone, it is gone. Now, back to unpaid soldiers, angry empires, and one of the most dangerous revenge stories in ancient history. The First Punic War was over. Rome had won. Carthage had lost. And as if losing a massive war was not painful enough, Carthage now owed Rome a mountain of reparations. That would have been bad on its own. But Carthage had another problem. Its mercenaries wanted to be paid. These were not gentlemen with patient accountants. They had fought for Carthage, risked their lives, and expected their money. But after losing the war, Carthage did not have enough cash to pay them in full. So the mercenaries revolted. What followed was the Mercenary War, a brutal and destructive conflict that nearly destroyed Carthage from the inside. The city was so desperate that it hired more mercenaries to fight the mercenaries it had already failed to pay. Not exactly a strong financial strategy. While Carthage was struggling not to collapse, Rome watched from across the water. Rome had already beaten Carthage once. Now, Carthage was tearing itself apart. For the Romans, this looked like an opportunity, and Rome loved opportunities. During the chaos, rebels on the Carthaginian island of Sardinia asked Rome for help. Rome looked at that request and saw free land. So, Roman forces moved in. Carthage objected. Sardinia belonged to Carthage. Rome claimed it was simply responding to a request for help. Carthage said it would handle the rebels itself. Rome answered with the thing Carthage feared most, the threat of war. Carthage was in no condition to fight Rome again. So it backed down. Rome kept Sardinia and Corsica. Then Rome demanded even more money from Carthage on top of the reparations already owed from the First Punic War. For Carthage, this was humiliation piled on humiliation. They had lost Sicily. They had lost money. Their mercenaries had nearly destroyed them. Now, Rome had taken more territory, while Carthage was weak. If Rome was trying to fill Carthage with rage, it was doing an excellent job. The seeds of the Second Punic War were now in the ground. But first, Carthage had to survive. The man who helped save it was Hamilcar Barca, one of Carthage's greatest commanders, and a hero of the First Punic War. He crushed the rebel mercenaries with extreme brutality and restored order. The Mercenary War ended. Carthage survived. But it was no longer the dominant power it had once been. Only a few decades earlier, Carthage had been the major force in the Western Mediterranean. Now it was weakened, humiliated, and financially trapped under Rome's demands. Carthage needed money. A lot of money. Hamilcar had an answer: Spain. Spain had silver mines. Silver meant wealth. Wealth meant Carthage could pay Rome rebuild its strength, and maybe, one day, take revenge. To many Carthaginian politicians, Spain looked like a financial solution. To Hamilcar, it was also something much more useful. It gave him distance from Carthage's cautious government. It gave him room to build his own power. It gave him soldiers resources and independence. And deep down, Hamilcar had not forgotten Rome. He was bitter about the First Punic War. He believed Carthaginian politicians had betrayed the army by surrendering. He hated Rome for taking Carthage's pride, territory, and wealth. Spain gave him a chance to prepare for the future. And he did not go alone. He brought his young son, Hannibal. Hannibal was only a boy, but Hamilcar wanted him shaped by war. According to tradition, before leaving for Spain, Hamilcar made Hannibal swear an oath never to be a friend of Rome. That oath mattered. Hannibal did not grow up as a normal child of privilege. He grew up inside a military project built on resentment. He watched his father fight, negotiate, expand, and command. He learned that Rome was not just an enemy. Rome was the enemy. In Spain, Hamilcar went to work. The land was already home to many Iberian tribes, and they were not exactly waiting around for Carthage to take over. Hamilcar fought them, pushed Carthaginian influence deeper into the region and built a new power base. Hannibal watched everything. He became a child of war. He saw campaigns up close. He learned how armies moved, how men followed leaders, how enemies broke, and how power was built. He even gained battle scars at a young age. As Hamilcar expanded Carthaginian control, the silver mines began producing wealth. Money flowed back to Carthage. Carthage began paying its debts. It began to breathe again. A new city was eventually founded in Spain, New Carthage. It became a symbol of Carthage's recovery and of the growing power of the Barcid family. Rome noticed. Carthage was supposed to be beaten. It was supposed to be weak. But in Spain, Hamilcar had built something dangerous. A Carthaginian empire within reach of Roman interests, filled with money, soldiers, and ambition. Rome was alarmed, but it was also busy. It had wars elsewhere, including expansion in the north, where Roman forces were enslaving thousands of northern Celts. So rather than attack immediately, Rome tried to contain Carthage with a treaty. The agreement drew a line at the Ebro River. North of that river would fall into Rome's sphere of influence. South of it would be Carthage's. Carthage was not to expand north beyond that line. For a moment, this seemed to control the danger. Then Hamilcar died. He was ambushed near a river and drowned. His death left the Carthaginian project in Spain to others. His son-in-law took command for a time, but he was later assassinated. Then finally, command passed to Hannibal. He was only 26, but the army accepted him. That was not just because of his name. Hannibal had grown up with these soldiers. He shared their hardships. He lived like them. He could be first into danger and last out of it. He looked and acted like the heir to Hamilcar, and the men respected him deeply. That loyalty would be essential. Hannibal had inherited more than an army. He had inherited his father's mission. Carthage was growing stronger. Rome did not like it. The peace between them was tense thin and ready to snap. All it needed was one crisis. That crisis came at Saguntum. Saguntum was a city in Spain, according to the Ebro River Treaty. It lay in the region that should have been within Carthage's sphere of influence. But Saguntum had formed an informal alliance with Rome after Rome helped it in an internal dispute. As Carthaginian power expanded nearby, Saguntum became afraid. Rome declared itself protector of the city. From the Carthaginian point of view, this was outrageous. Rome had no business protecting a city south of the Ebro. To Hannibal, it looked like Roman interference, Roman arrogance, and maybe even a Roman attempt to keep a foothold in Spain for a future war. At first, Hannibal held back, but he had been raised to hate Rome. He had inherited his father's revenge, and Saguntum offered something useful, a spark. Maybe Rome was using Saguntum to provoke him. Maybe Hannibal was using Saguntum to provoke Rome. Either way, the city was trapped between two great powers, and neither side was going to step away quietly. Then, Saguntum made the situation worse by raiding Carthaginian territory. That was enough. In 219 BC, Hannibal besieged the city. The siege lasted 8 brutal months. When Hannibal finally broke through the defenses, Saguntum was turned into a killing field. Rome erupted in anger. To Rome, Hannibal had attacked a Roman ally. To Carthage, Rome had no right to have that ally in the first place. A Roman delegation went to Carthage, led by the respected senator Fabius Maximus. He demanded that Hannibal be handed over for punishment. Carthage refused. Then, Fabius gave Carthage a choice peace, or war. Carthage let Rome choose. Rome chose war. The Second Punic War had begun. At first, Rome felt confident. They had beaten Carthage before. Now, Rome was stronger, richer, and better positioned. The plan seemed simple. One Roman consul would sail toward Carthage and strike the enemy homeland. Another would go to Spain and stop Hannibal before he could cause real trouble. After all, what could Hannibal possibly do? Cross the Alps. That was exactly what Hannibal intended to do. Rome expected a war fought like the last one, with Carthage reacting defensively, while Rome took the initiative. Hannibal wanted to reverse that. He would not sit and wait for Rome to invade Carthage or Spain. He would carry the war into Italy itself. It was bold. It was dangerous. It was almost insane. The plan depended on surprise. If Hannibal could appear in northern Italy, Rome would be shocked. He could threaten the Roman homeland. He could encourage recently conquered Celtic tribes to join him. He could turn Italy into the battlefield before Rome was ready. But first, he had to get there. In 218 BC, Hannibal crossed the Ebro River with an enormous army, nearly 100,000 men, at the start of the campaign. He marched north out of Spain. Before reaching the Alps, he first had to cross the Pyrenees. That alone was difficult. The army faced rough terrain, hostile tribes, and the enormous strain of moving men, animal supplies, and elephants across mountains and foreign lands. Losses began before the hardest part had even started. After the Pyrenees, Hannibal entered southern Gaul, where more tribes stood in his way. Some opposed him. Some had to be fought. Every delay and every battle cost him men. Then came the Rhône River. Roman consul Scipio, on his way to Spain, discovered that Hannibal was nearby. Suddenly, the campaign became a race. Hannibal had to get his army across the Rhône before the Romans could catch him. The crossing was chaotic. The elephants panicked. Men drowned. Scouting parties from both sides clashed in the first combat of the war. When Scipio finally reached Hannibal's camp, he found it empty. Hannibal had escaped. Scipio realized what was happening. Hannibal was not staying in Spain. He was going over the Alps and into Italy. Rome did not know where he would emerge. For the first time, a Carthaginian army threatened the Roman homeland. Scipio sent his army onward to Spain, but he himself rushed back to Italy to raise forces in case Hannibal survived the crossing. And now Hannibal faced the Alps. The timing was terrible. It was already autumn. The mountains were cold, hostile, and dangerous. The army was exhausted from the long march, but Hannibal pushed forward. The crossing became one of the most famous military marches in history. It was also a nightmare. Men froze. Men starved. Men slipped off icy cliffs. Animals died. Supplies were lost. Some accounts say soldiers ate pack animals. Some even stripped clothing from dying comrades to survive the cold. This was not a clean, heroic march. It was misery at altitude, and nature was not the only enemy. Mountain tribes watched Hannibal's army struggle through narrow paths and dangerous passes. They saw armor supplies, animals, and weakness. Some offered to guide the Carthaginians, then ambushed them. Boulders crashed down from above. Men and animals tumbled into the depths. Hannibal had to reorganize his marching column, fight off attacks, and keep the army moving through terrain that punished every mistake. Losses mounted. At the summit, the army was exhausted and demoralized. Hannibal tried to restore their courage. He showed them the plains below and told them Italy was ahead. Food allies and Rome itself were waiting beyond the mountains. The hardest part seemed to be over. It was not. The descent was just as deadly. The paths were narrow. Ice made every step dangerous. At one point, the road had collapsed, and the men spent days repairing it in freezing conditions. When the army finally reached the Italian plains, it had survived the Alps, but at a terrible price. Hannibal had left Spain with around 100,000 men. By the time he reached Italy, he had roughly 26,000. He was deep in enemy territory, far from Carthage, with no easy supply line and no obvious source of reinforcements. His army was battered, hungry, and reduced. Any elephants that had made it were probably in no mood for further adventure. So what was the point? Why would a commander deliberately lead his army through such a destructive route? Because Hannibal had a plan. Northern Italy was full of Celtic tribes recently conquered by Rome. Many resented Roman rule. Hannibal hoped they would see him as a liberator. If he could win them over, they would provide men supplies and local support. He did not need Carthage to reinforce him if Italy itself could become his source of power. But to win those tribes, Hannibal had to make an impression. One of his first moves in Italy was to destroy a tribe that refused to join him. It was a brutal message. Hannibal was not merely asking for support. He was showing that Rome was not the only power to fear. For the Romans, the news must have been deeply disturbing. A Carthaginian army had crossed into Italy, not by sea, not through the expected routes, but over the Alps. Hannibal had survived the impossible and appeared in their backyard, At first glance, Rome might not have been terrified. Hannibal's army had been badly reduced. It looked worn down by the mountains. But Rome did not yet understand what kind of enemy had arrived. Hannibal was not just another Carthaginian general. He was the son of Hamilcar Barca. He had been raised on revenge. He had built the loyalty of his men through hardship. He had tricked Rome, escaped Scipio, crossed the Alps, and entered Italy with a plan to tear Rome's alliances apart. The Second Punic War had barely begun, but the danger was already clear. There was now a monster loose in Italy, and he wanted Roman blood.